Well, just when you thought you learned everything you possibly could learn about the Lightroom app, there's another very important feature in this app, and that happens to be if you click on the bottom right. I don't know, I'm going to do it one more time, but this button right here, it just looks like the camera. Okay, well that brings up something that looks a lot like the native camera app, but it turns out that there are a lot of advanced features within this camera app. So let's just orient ourselves a little bit to what it is we're seeing. And I'm going to go, first off, always know that you can get out of this if you click the X in the upper left. And there we go. Now this flash with a line through it is right next to that X, and that gives us just the same options that we have within the native camera app on your iPhone. Flash is auto, on or off. I am not a big fan of flash unless it's, and you're in complete darkness. If you can tell, I use a tripod when I'm taking these images, and now usually when I take images with my digital SLR, the camera that's actually taking the video for this, I never use a flash for that, and if I'm in a situation with very low light, I use my tripod. So both of the cameras right now are on tripods, and I'm much more a fan of tripods than I am of flashes. And so the middle button here says DNG. That file format there, you can choose between JPEG and DNG. Now, for our purposes here, I think it's fine if you leave it on either one, actually. You could leave it on JPEG, you could leave it on DNG. It's not going to make a really huge difference. It might, if you play around with it, it could. But I want to make one point about this. File size is critical once you get into once you go a little bit further with your interest in photography. So the file here called JPEG, that is a file that is, I'm sorry, here we go, JPEG. That is a file that is highly compressed. Now what does that mean, compressed? So the best way I can explain it is to say that with my digital SLR camera, I can take a photograph in what's called a RAW, R-A-W file format, and it has a ton of information, a ton of pixels, and a ton of it's digital, so there's a ton of ones and zeros. And that file is huge. It's like a 30 megabyte file. It would, if you enlarged it to a poster size print, you wouldn't see pixels, I don't think. It is a very clear, huge image. Whereas a JPEG file is a file that's been compressed. And compressed, if you think about it, it's just squeezing down the size of the file and throwing away information. And because it's digital, it's all ones and zeros. It throws away as much information as it can. It throws away pixels. It throws away different things that it thinks that it can get by with throwing away. But the thing is, you end up with a photograph that has less resolution, and that limits you when it comes to making edits to your photograph at a later time. So if you're getting into this, for professional applications, always take photographs at the very highest resolution that you possibly can. And in this case, like the raw file format that my camera takes is what I always take in. And I can compress, if those files are too big, I can always compress them later. My Lightroom actually has a function where it compresses photographs for you. So, and then this is the selfie. I'm going to step out of the way, but this, so you can hit the button in the upper right there, and it'll just switch the camera above the speaker on your phone there. It just switches to that camera, which I believe is actually a lower resolution camera than the other one, so keep that in mind. If you want to take, there's actually, the sensor is better in the camera on the other side. So another important feature is right below that selfie. So this is just packed with features here. So if you click these three little dots, you end up with a new set of features. You have, here is the aspect ratio. And so you can actually go in and say, like, again, if you want to take a photograph as a square. Now, remember way back to the beginning of the class, and I said, let's take the photographs, you know, as they are initially, and that's 4:3. You just want to take it with maximum information, and that way, if at a later time you want to crop your image, you can. But if you've cropped it when you've taken the image, you have no ability to get that information back. And so the timer is actually more advanced. I believe there's one more setting here. So there's 2 seconds, 5 seconds, and 10 seconds. So it's a little, I think there's one more feature than the native iPhone app. But yeah, you would just click this and then click whatever, however many seconds you want, and then it would be on. Now this, here. So this is the grid and level. Now I have it set to level. And this is I've just been experimenting with this, and I'll go ahead and show you. But now I'm going to tilt the camera and watch what's happening. I don't know if you can see that, but I've got a line that goes this way and this way, and once they meet together, do you see that line, how it just popped up and turned, like, that says it's level. It's interesting. I guess there's a level mechanism within, I don't know what that's called, within the iPhone. Now there's also a dot there in the center that if I move the photograph down, and then I move it up until it's perfectly perpendicular to the ground, then that dot will appear. So that's an interesting little feature there that I've just been exploring, but you don't have to have that turned on. In fact, I think I'll turn it off because I didn't get quite as much out of it as I was thinking. I mean, if you want to take a photograph that's perfectly level to the ground and perfectly perpendicular, that's helpful. This grid here, I'm going to take this level off. This grid here divides it into 4 rectangles. That could be helpful. There's a grid here. I think that's probably the one I would use most if I was going to use a grid, because in photography, oftentimes photographers talk about dividing into thirds. So having a third of your image be one thing, and then the middle being something else, and then so the thirds is helpful to think of thirds. It's not a rule that you should always follow, but. And lastly, this is like there's the same amount of rectangles, but the middle ones have been squished a little bit, so that could be helpful too. Those are just something to explore. I'm gonna go ahead and click the button on the far left because, you know, I don't actually take photographs with my grid on with iPhone very much. Lastly, this little gear button, max screen brightness. Now that would have been helpful at the very beginning there. If you turn that on, that means that even if you're using your phone to save batteries for some other application, you can when you log into Lightroom, your screen brightness is going to automatically go up. And again, I think, you know, you have to absolutely look at this in the maximum screen brightness, otherwise you're compromising. Your eyes can't see all the detail. Yeah, so geotagged photos, I believe that just puts the GPS coordinates, like attaches it to your photograph, and I just always keep that on. And save unprocessed original saves the normal unprocessed photo in addition to the HDR version. I have that off, but you know, you could do what you want with that. And that's it for those 3 buttons right there. Now, so far it seems fairly like similar to the native iPhone camera app. So what would be the difference? Why would you even want to get into this? And the reason has to do with this button down here. It says auto, and you can get into 3 different options: automatic, professional, and high dynamic range. And so that's what we're going to explore in the next video.